Fantastic. Thanks very much. Welcome everybody to our January 10th regular council meeting. I'd like to just start by respectfully acknowledging that we are gathering on the unceded territory of the Comox First Nations, the traditional keepers of this land. Introduction of late items. We do have one late item that Councillor Hillian will be bringing forward. I don't know if you want to speak to it now. I can, there you go.
Thanks, Mayor. This is a resolution in relation to the transit strike that's impacting so many in the valley, and I circulated it to council last night and staff, and I'm hopeful that people will agree to putting it on the agenda today. Thanks.
Thanks very much for that. Much appreciated. Adoption of minutes. We get the regular council minutes from December 6th. All right. Are there any errors or omissions? And seeing none, we'll assume those are adopted unanimously, and we'll move into our delegations. And so tonight we have a delegation from the Comox Valley Situation Table. And I don't have a name here, so I'm going to let you introduce yourself if that's all right. And I'll turn on your microphone. Oh, it's Dana. Hi, Dana.
Hi.
Sorry, it was in red and I didn't see it. Totally my fault. Dana, thank you very much.
Thank you all for having me here today, and thank you for coming. I'm excited to be here to speak to you about a new initiative and resource in our community. My name is Dana Forsgren, and I am coordinating the Comox Valley Situation Table. Slide. During today's presentation, I will be telling you a little bit about what a situation table is, the different roles at the situation table, how tables are structured across the province, some of the trends that we're seeing and the benefits, and I'll also leave you with some considerations as well. Slide. The situation table is supported by and often brought to communities by the Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General. It is a part of our province's community safety plan. The situation table is not a new model. It has been in Canada for over 10 years. It's in multiple provinces. And in BC, there are 33 active tables and a dozen more are being mobilized. On Vancouver Island, we have a table in Victoria, in Cowichan Valley, in Nanaimo, Campbell River, and one is now mobilizing in Port Hardy as well. So what is a situation table? It is not an entity. It is a meeting space for public safety, healthcare, social services, and Indigenous support services to collaboratively support situations of high risk in our community, to offer rapid support where if no intervention is provided, then there would be significant harm that might occur. Slide. Thank you. This slide is a visual of some of the risks that are impacting our community. And this is one individual we supported at our situation table and the risk factors that were impacting this individual at one point in time. So looking at this individual and all these risk factors, we can understand that these challenges are very complex, that this person would have to navigate a multitude of different systems and sectors to regain some stability in their lives. What we aim to do at the table is recognize these challenges, come together and collaborate to reduce as many barriers as we can while providing a rapid offer of support. On the right of this slide, you can see a term, acutely elevated risk. And this is what we're looking for when situations are coming to the table. So there are 4 factors that situations must meet, that situations have significant interest at stake, that there is reasonable belief that harm will occur if nothing is done, that the anticipated harm is severe or significant, and that the risks that are impacting this individual are multidisciplinary and covering multiple different sectors and systems. Slide, please. This next slide is a list of our main partners at the Comox Valley Situation Table. These are the agencies that are committed to attending the table on a bi-weekly basis. These are, what we have is representatives from each one of these agencies coming to the table to present situations of high risk or collaborate with other agencies at the table alongside them. Often for these agencies, their mandates and services highly align with the situation table. They're already supporting people at very high risk in the community. Slide. Other roles at the situation table are secondary partners. And this list of secondary partners goes beyond our main partners. These are agencies that might come to the table on an as-needed basis. They can be asked to come to the table to support us with one of the situations, or they might come to the table and use the table as a resource as well. And some examples here are the Senior Support Society, the CV Emergency Management Services, the Comox First Nation, and Lush. The next role is the Systems Leaders Group. And this is a group of senior level managers in the Comox Valley. And often these are leadership that are sitting at the table. It's also often including city representatives. What the purposes of this table of this group is to provide oversight to the table chair and the coordinator. And more importantly, to take a look at some of the risk factors that we're seeing trends with, and helping us decide on how we can address some of these gaps in social services in our community. Slide, please. This next chart is showing you how tables are managed across BC. And so you can see that many of our tables have a partnership with city or municipality, with RCMP, some nonprofits have taken ownership, and Health Authority has also taken ownership of some of the tables. This is an important slide because often nonprofit is partnering with these other institutions, and that partnership is incredibly important for the ongoing success and sustainability of the table. It's also an excellent way to ensure that there is effective communication about the risk factors impacting our community. Slide, please. I'm going to start telling you a little bit about the data we've collected. So this slide will show you our top referring agencies at the table, and you can see some of these top referring agencies are RCMP, Courtenay Bylaw, Wache Friendship Center, and the CVRD, the CV Emergency Management Services. So many of those agencies are providing services for individuals experiencing emergencies in our community. And the table really helps to facilitate communication with these agencies to the most appropriate support services in our community. We also have Wache Friendship Center, which is not only a top referring agency, but they are a top collaborator at the table as well. And on the other side on the right, you can see that there's a list of those agencies most commonly involved in collaborative support planning. And this is interesting to see because some of these top agencies, VIHA is mental health and substance use. We have Wache Friendship Center, Courtenay Bylaw, Downtown Action on Homelessness, and Income Assistance. And these are agencies coming from a variety of different backgrounds professionally, from different resources, different sectors, coming together to discuss these very, very complex situations and how to take steps forward and best forms of support for those individuals. Slide, please. Thank you. This next slide is breaking down some of those most common risks that are presented in our community. We are keeping track of over 100 different risk factors, and these risk factors are unique. It's looking at those preventative risks before a crisis occurs. What we're seeing here is some of those familiar, persistent risk factors, such as poverty and housing, substance misuse and mental health. We're also seeing trends with physical health concerns, with crime victimization, unemployment, and criminal involvement. These are very complex situations that also shed light on how important it is to have a collaborative effort in supporting these situations to achieve sustainability for these individuals. The Comox Valley started the table only 7 months ago in June 2023. We are regularly meeting and building a stronger foundation for a really clean process and partnerships among one another in the community. Some of the benefits we're seeing so far are that we are helping vulnerable community members and partners better understand the resources we already have in the community, and we're increasing use of those resources. We're strengthening partnerships among the sectors that are typically siloed and not having a lot of overlap in the community. We're collecting unique data that can help us understand where we can support people so crisis does not occur. This is preventative risk-based data. And we're also among a group of individuals that are typically not communicating in those siloed sectors. We are communicating about systematic issues that are impacting all of our different sectors in the community and discussing potential solutions so we can share that with the system leaders group. Slide, please. In conclusion for today, I want to leave council with a few considerations. One, that City participates on the systems leaders group. We believe that City's participation on the systems leaders group will provide more effective communication of these system issues and trends we're seeing in our community, and allow for an effective relationship in understanding how we can address some of those gaps in social services. We're also a growing table and therefore seeking advice, recommendations, and support from council to seek a more appropriate space for the situation table so we can appropriately accommodate our growing team. Slide, thank you. And thank you very much to everyone for coming today. I really appreciate your time and consideration. Your support in these areas will contribute to the continued success of our table and our collaborative effort at the situation table. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dana, for the presentation. I'll let other people get ready to ask some questions too that popped into my head. One was when you ask for city representation, is that elected or staff? Because I thought we had bylaw was attending those meetings.
Oh, for the systems leaders group, often what we have found is that city planners are most effective in those system leader group meetings. This is a low commitment meeting. This is about a biannual meeting that those leaderships those leaders would come together. So
fantastic. No, that's great. And I do see there's some other questions here, so I'll pass it over to some of my councillors, starting with Councillor Hillian.
Thanks. Thanks, Mayor. Thanks very much, Dana. Good to meet you. I'm not sure if you're aware that the suggestion for facilitating the situation table originally came to us as a council, and we basically messaged the community to see who was willing to take it on, because we weren't really sure why we should. In fact, one of the questions we asked when we sent the letter was, were people already meeting? And my experience in human services in the community has been of the continual need to bring people together from various agencies. So, somewhat surprised that it wasn't already happening to some extent. Anyway, really pleased with the work that you're doing. Is it not the case that the John Howard Society did agree to take on the sponsorship of this?
So John Howard Society is our fiscal host. So for the ongoing success of the table, we do not yet have a partnership for ongoing financial support. And at this time, I would say that for ongoing success, often these tables do partner with an institution such as city, municipality, RCMP, or health authority. Yeah.
Okay, and I believe there was some limited funding from Ministry of Solicitor General, but only really for training and setting the thing up. Is that true? That's
correct. Yeah. So we have some money for mobilization of the table, and my role as coordinator will be funded for one more year as well.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's always a dilemma, isn't it? We have all these provincially funded and mandated agencies that are out there supposedly working together, and yet they don't have the money to provide coordination services. It was ever this. One of the other things that I think we ran into over the years was the fact that a lot of situations are hampered by policy blockages, services that don't quite fit. And one of the things I wondered about over the years was whether or not there needed to be some sort of an override capacity where you actually had somebody who could override individual ministry or agency policy to make things happen. And I'm just wondering if you've run into that at your table, and if you've had any success breaking the bureaucratic logjam to get services in place to help improve some of these desperate situations.
From my experience, the situation table is a really great space for doing things differently. And it's trying to bring people together and really group those resources and those ideas. And I hear what you're saying. I think part of that is when you're in a specific service and you have a specific mandate, there's some of those limitations. But what I'm seeing is bringing all these individuals to the table. We're bringing those ideas together. And even if it's a piece of a resource that you're offering, coming together with each and every one of those resources makes for a better, more holistic type of support.
Great. Thanks for that, and good luck with it.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Councillor Hillian. And maybe as a follow-up to one of the questions there, because you talked about those community partners, which again, naively, I think I similarly thought that John Howard was kind of that partner. And you had those communities that had those different partnerships. And so do they have a different flavor if it's the RCMP versus the health authority versus the municipality? Like or is it just a fiscal host and really there's no difference?
I can imagine it might have a different feel or a different culture in some ways, but I really find that, the table is really made up of so many different individuals in the community. That's what really creates that culture. And it is an even playing field, really. We're all coming together for the same purpose. And so when we do speak regularly with the other table chairs across the province, we have a monthly meeting for collaborative practice and best practice among the tables. And really overall, they're all very successful. They're all in it for the same reason. And it's really to do something different and to provide support in a way that's really seeing the whole person. So I don't know how different it is, but I think the main piece I'm seeing is that when there's extra resources or even simply meeting spaces that are more appropriate, even that has a massive impact. And so that's the main difference I'm noticing, is when there's a little more support from these other institutions. Sometimes there's better spaces and more training available for the table.
Thanks so much for that. Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Dana. Appreciate hearing about this. I guess my first question is trying to better understand how it's operating in other communities. You're saying that we have a fiscal partnership, which I'm not quite sure I understand that, but we don't have ongoing financial support. And so what's going on in other communities?
So often these tables are managed, and what would happen is that cities will take it on, and it's being managed by one of the representatives within the city, and either city will manage it ongoing and will organize all the meetings and will help to organize training for those different partners. But really, it is. It's simply a piece that's written into these different roles within city. And so it's become a part of their role as a way to understand those risk factors. And often it's community safety is a piece of that role, that they're trying to gain more information. So the situation table aligns really well with their role already.
Sure. And so as Councillor Hillian pointed out, we got some money to maybe set it up, but we don't have money to keep it going. And that's kind of what we need. And do you have any idea what that's been costing other communities, or is that a further discussion?
And what I'm planning to do is also present again with some of those numbers. It is a very part-time role in facilitating. The mobilization was a larger fund. It was a grant, because that mobilization takes more time. You're building networks and you're educating the community and trying to set up that success and succession planning ongoing. It's quite a low, it's quite low hours ongoing, from what I'm hearing from other chairs in around BC.
Okay, great. And about the meeting space, do you have a ballpark number of people that have been meeting, or you expect to be meeting on an ongoing basis?
At this time, I would say that the max number we've seen coming is about 17, and currently it has just been expanding. In the next meeting, I'm having to tell some people to not come, as we don't have the appropriate space. We've had a very welcoming space at the Restorative Justice Center, but we are having quite a few more interested community members wanting to join, and that's become a bit of a problem. now. Yeah.
Okay, well.
So I would say about 20, I would say often these tables are about 25 individuals, up to 25.
One of those good problems that so many people want to help.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thanks very much. I
You're
appreciate it.
welcome.
Thanks, Councillor Frisch and Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Dana. This was really encouraging news. When we first heard it was coming to the community, we were hoping that it would see this sort of support. And
Yeah.
I guess some of my questions relate to the kind of support you need to keep it going. It sounds like, as Councillors Hilly and Frisch were saying, that province gave enough to get it off the ground, but not to keep it going. Do you have like you said it's less kind of intensive in terms of hours once it's up and running, which makes a lot of sense. Do you have a sense of roughly what an annual budget would look like for a year going forward once it's up and going?
I think what I would probably prefer to do is get back to you on that.
Okay.
Rather than providing a ballpark at this time. I think I'd like to have a more accurate number. I do have something in the back of my mind, but I think if I can provide you a little bit more information, I'd love to do that.
Okay, that sounds great.
Okay.
And I also wanted to follow up on the idea of a location. I know that you have CVRD representation on the situation table. Have you had a chance to talk about possibly using any CVRD rooms or facilities like this one?
We're in communication, and I was informed that I should come to council and see if there can be an approval. And so I'm now, I'm seeking that today, and I will be presenting to CVRD in the spring as well. So hopefully we're going to get there, because I think that a space such as this would really allow for a more appropriate space for us all to come together.
Well, maybe as your email's up there, maybe it could be in touch as chair of the CVRD to see if it's something we can do to work on the space issue. But it sounds like you're going to be coming not too long from now to the board.
I hope so.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for everything you're doing. Look forward to being in touch.
Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Cole Hamilton. And yeah, it can be a little confusing where like the city, we help do this, but it's actually
Yes.
a regional thing, which is more CVRD. And then this space obviously is ideal, but I'm sure the chair who has heard your question will be following up. So thanks so much for that, Councillor Cole Hamilton, and moving on to Councillor Morin.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Thanks so much for the presentation. It's nice to get a little bit more detail on what these mystery situation tables are all about. I had a couple questions. One is around the confidentiality piece with so many different agencies and everybody having different protocols for confidentiality. And it sounds like you bring sort of a case study and not necessarily identifying like a name. I don't know, maybe you do, but I just know in a small community, it's super easy to figure out who someone's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I just from working with many clients over the years in social services, it's often very tough to get someone to agree to have 15 different agencies know their personal information. So I had curiosity around that. And then I have a couple other minor questions. Thanks.
No, and it's a good question, and it's one that comes up often. So we, at the table, everyone who comes to the table is already bound by their own privacy protocols and policies. We also have an integrated program agreement to ensure that privacy is maintained. At the table, when situations are presented, it is de-identified until it's accepted at the table as meeting that high risk threshold of acutely elevated risk. And at that point, what we're recognizing is that if this situation is such high risk that harm will occur, then really we need to step in, or something really severe is going to happen to this person. And from this program, this situation table is approved by the Privacy Commissioner of BC. So they have actually looked at a system and approved the system that we are using at the table. And table partners are undergoing training to ensure that they understand that process. But what we also find is that those who are coming to the table are providing consent. So they are seeking that support, and they really feel very grateful that people are coming together to offer that support. And that's, for the most part, what we are recognizing.
Yeah, that's great to know that most people are providing that consent, but it sounds like the privacy commissioner has approved even if
Yes.
people haven't given consent.
Yeah, and there are cases.
And I understand like dire
Mhm.
situations and safety for sure,
Right.
and I get that.
Mhm.
But it just, yeah,
Mhm.
I'm glad to hear that people are giving their consent, but it sounds like you don't have to have that consent.
That's right. Yes. And so consent is not always required if we are seeing that if nothing is done, then this person could potentially have, harm that would completely alter their life or perhaps end in fatality. Mhm.
I found the snapshot of the different communities really interesting. There were so many, like everything, they were all so different and different, percentages. I'm just looking at Burnaby, 42% female and only 14% male.
Mhm.
And I also noticed youth numbers much higher in other areas. And, as a long time youth service provider, I always have that belief that early intervention is super important. And I just wondered what your, if there's a conscious focus on certain age groups or if you're just sort of, taking what's presented at the table.
So in our table, for the most part, we are supporting adults. We're often supporting adults. And part of that is that we are still building our partnership in the community and are just about to speak with school district. And so coming to the table with school district, we'll probably see more young people being presented at our table. There's no age limit on who can be presented. And I think what we're finding is that the situation table can be extremely helpful in providing a more well-rounded picture of what's taking place in someone's life. Because often if you have a youth who's being brought to the table, perhaps their parents also need support. And their names are also released. So because we have other adult type services at the table, they can provide support to the whole family and not just the children.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And then just one last comment, and that's looking at the most common risks. And I just want to note, because there's going to be other conversations later tonight related to, some of the social difficulties that we're having in the community. I just wanted to note that the highest percentage was 48% poverty. So substance misuse was about a third. Mm-hmm. Criminal involvement was actually only 20%. So I just think that's super important for us to note. We do have a poverty reduction strategy that's been kind of sitting, waiting. But I think it's really important to note that really poverty is at the root of most of our social problems. And it's very evident in these stats that are from the entire province. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Councillor Moore, and really thanks for pointing out that poverty precursor that's out there. Councillor Jolicoeur.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. And thanks, Dana. It's nice to have you at council. And really, actually, it was the first time I got to read the report from the province on the analysis of the 17 situation tables. I have had the opportunity of being a staff person in Ontario on a public health / police-led situation table. So a very different framework there. There was the head of the local police and the medical officer, and then one here in BC where it was the lead agency was a local nonprofit agency, similar to John Howard. And very different lenses. I've also been able to do the training. And so I was really excited to see the previous council support, seeing the community getting this. And beyond what we've already talked about, I won't repeat what my colleagues have already asked about, but I'm curious if you can speak to, and Councillor Morin spoke to what we're going to be considering later today. And it's probably the number one issue we hear from people the most is around the challenges we have with poverty and homelessness, mental health and addiction in the community. And we often have been sharing with people that, this is our number one priority. We're spending a lot of our time and resources trying our best to address this in the capacity that we can at a local level. And this I really see as a foundational piece. And you spoke about it in the 4 pillars of the situation table, that elevated acute risk. And I'm really excited for you to be coming back regularly, to be sharing the success stories of the lives who we've been able to support through this. families, the workplaces, and the individuals who will be wrapped around with love and care as a result of all the partners at the table. But I'm wondering if you can speak in your experience and in speaking with your colleagues across the province, how you see this really addressing some of the larger social issues that we see, and this being the situation table.
You know, I think from what I'm seeing in the communities who have adopted the situation table already, and our province is a little bit newer. It's you know, like you said, in Ontario, some of these other provinces have had the situation table for many more years than BC. What I see is that these communities are just really establishing an excellent partnership among all these different sectors, and really building this space of communication and support and collaboration. They're communicating about where there's gaps. They're being open about new ideas together. I think this is really what I'm seeing, is that people are all on the same page in the community and less divided.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for your presentation.
You're welcome.
Excellent. I don't see any further questions or comments, so thank you so much. And I think, you know, when this came to us originally, my first comment to our MLA before it even came to council was, you know, where's the money? You know, because really to make this sustainable and make sure that it has long-term success, we wanted to make sure that was there. And so that's still a question, you know, that seems to be a bit of a challenge. And I am glad to hear that it's not necessarily just the city, but we also have the regional district, town of Comox, village of Cumberland. And we have our own little silos as well. And then the regional district sometimes looks after things when it's a regional thing, but then that can be challenging as well. So really want to make sure that you know that you are well supported, I think, at this table. And I would believe across our whole community. And so just want to keep that conversation going and let us know what those numbers are so we can start budgeting as soon as possible, because that's the other part, is making sure we can have the money to you when you need it. So thanks again.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you all.
All right. Next, we're going to move on to staff reports, and we have the City of Courtenay Communication Strategy, and I'll pass it over to staff. Mr. Garbett.
Mayor, Ms. Ngio is going to give us an overview, and we'll have involvement for the great team that's assisted us with this project.
City Manager to Mayor and Council. As Council is aware, this city staff have been working with the talented team at Spur Communication since last spring on the development of a communication strategy. This strategy is tailored to the City of Courtenay's specific needs, so we can ensure we're keeping all our residents informed about the work the city is doing in service to our community. Hilary Farson and Zakir Varani from Spur will be presenting this afternoon on the outcomes of the communication strategy for Council's consideration and answer any questions about the strategy that Council may have. I'll now turn this over to Hilary and Zakir for their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us in your space again, folks. So today on the agenda, we have 5 items. I'm going to ground our conversation in an introduction to the communication strategy. We'll then move to an overview of the engagement inputs that contributed to it. I'll then pass the reins over to my teammate Zakir, who will speak through the communication channels that are outlined in the strategy, the work planning and prioritization, and then we'll finish with information about forecasting. So this has been an exciting undertaking for the city, or at least as a communication nerd, I really think so. Building a communication strategy is complex and interdisciplinary, and it requires significant research, which we presented some of which to you in the fall to understand, you know, who your residents are, the information that they're looking for, and the channels that they're using. It also includes an audit of your existing communication methods and channels, all of which I'm going to kind of get back into in a moment. But more than that, it really requires a pretty significant collaboration across teams. So both the work that we got to do with your team, but more importantly, the work that your team members and departments did with each other as well. So to leave you with a strategy that works for your city, it has to be rooted in your processes, your resources, and your capabilities, not just within the communication department, but across the city more broadly. I'll speak here on this slide to kind of the 4 components of why we think communication strategies end up being quite complex. Although there are more reasons, there's kind of 4 central ones here. So the first is that a really strong strategy needs to reach diverse audiences. The diversity considerations are intersectional, and we needed to consider things like age and culture, ability, location, lived experience. It must also consider and include a range of channels. So different people, and I'll come back to this later, of course, typically use different channels in different ways. We need the channels, we need to understand the channels that your residents use and go there instead of thinking that they'll come to us. Further, not all residents use the same channels in the same way or at the same time, and the strategy needs to reflect that. Communication strategies are complex because they need to explore and reflect the patterns and trends within your city workflows. So you need a strategy that could both create planned and regularized communication while also holding space for ad hoc projects and topics. And finally, executing strong communication is resource intensive. So even more, it requires a blend of specialist and generalist skill sets for thoughtful execution. So I'll dive more into those just ever so briefly. When we think about reaching diverse audiences, we need to consider their diverse needs, the type of information that people are looking for and how they want to get it. We want to think about existing habits, as I mentioned. Where are people already going for this information? How can we tune into those habits instead of hoping that people will change theirs to come to us? And then, of course, a part of meaningful dialogue also requires teams to respectfully acknowledge and incorporate lived experiences. How can we make sure that we're using the right language and the right tactics that reflect these unique needs? Next, when we define the types of channels that the city should leverage, we think about existing channels that residents are familiar with. So for the city of Courtenay in particular, things like your website and your Facebook page. What city resources are available, both in terms of staff capacity, but also budget for things like mail drops or printing or advertising. And of course, the type of channel that will best convey the information that you're presenting. So we always like to think, like, don't use a white paper when you could really use an infographic. So ultimately, efficacy is really a key pillar, and we want to reach the most number of people and the most diverse audiences with the resources and the channels that make sense. As with many communication strategies, you need to be able to plan for both proactive and reactive communication. So to meet this need, we tried to map out your communication plan for 2024 that would allow you to not only see when projects were going to fire, but the level of resourcing that would be required in order to execute them. This is something that we'll come back to in a couple times, and I don't want to spoil the magic because I know that's coming down the pike, but I'll tease it a little bit here. But what we really need to know then is, when are our busy seasons likely to be, and what do we need to do in advance to make it through them with ease? So it's not surprising that executing a communication program is, of course, resource intensive. As mentioned a few slides back, a good communication team will have both specialists and generalists on their team. And this is particularly true when you need interdisciplinary teams to execute certain projects, especially across departments. So again, Zakir will go into this shortly, but we have created a system that allows you to quickly understand the type and the volume of staffing required to execute your annual program in advance, and then adapt as needed. Finally, I did just want to say we really enjoy working with the City of Courtenay because there's such values alignment. We were given the directive to create a strategy that prioritizes equity, transparency, and intentional engagement with your diverse audiences and interest holders. And this type of approach really does ensure that your strategy balances your internal needs with those of your community. So next, I wanted to provide a very quick overview of some of the engagement inputs that I just mentioned. I know we would have previewed some of this in the fall, but I wanted to follow up with an overview of all of the things that we've been up to. So as you know, we did an audience assessment, which allowed our team to research who lives in your community and what communication channels are popular right now. We then did a comprehensive communication channel audit, and of course our interviews with you, Mayor and Council, which we presented here last September. And then we hosted a prioritization workshop with your department heads. So this allowed our team to get a more accurate sense of what was coming down the pike at what time throughout the year, and how we might prioritize resources to meet the needs of those initiatives. Next, we held an interest holder workshop with people who work with organizations that serve equity deserving communities. We wanted to better understand the challenges that organizations are facing in distributing information to their communities and how folks are receiving it. And therefore, the ways that we might create systems designed with those needs specifically in mind. We also did a youth survey through our partnership with Foundry. Through this, we were able to ask, what are some of the communication and methods and channels that youth are using right now? And where do they think some of the barriers are to accessing them or hearing back from youth in our communication program? We then conducted a tool assessment. So what tools and technologies are already out there right now that might help amplify or streamline city messaging and distribution channels? And finally, as I've alluded to a couple times already, we did a resourcing assessment. So we examined resourcing methods, challenges, and workflows. And I probably shouldn't say too much more so that I don't steal Zakir's thunder. So with that, why don't I hand it over to you, Z?
Thank you so much for allowing me to retain my thunder. It is very much appreciated. Just to echo what Hill was saying previously, I just want to thank you for allowing us the space to speak through this. It's been a very fun process for us to work through, and I'm quite excited with where we've landed. And so to start this section off, I want to talk through how we've approached assessing and segmenting the existing channels for the city. And it's been based on a few key factors, all drawing from the pillars that Hill just highlighted. One is how the different channels available apply to different communication scenarios, and the types of effort that each channel requires, and the types of content needed to execute well on these channels. So in the groupings here, you can, I'm sure, see the connections in those spaces, but it's ultimately about grouping things in terms of what reaches which specific audiences to ensure the most reach, but then also looking at the types of effort required to execute at a continuously high level across these spaces. And over the next few slides, I just want to go through a high-level overview of our assessment and recommendations across the digital and traditional channels. So first and foremost, Courtney.ca. What I want to say here, I think, off the top is we're in an era that sometimes is rife with distrust of information sources. It's very easy to come across news that is hard to trace to a verifiable source. And the more crucial the communication event, the more important that factor becomes. And in Courtney.ca, we see the single source of truth that is easily verifiable and already trusted by your residents. And that's something to be harnessed as a linchpin of this strategy. Courtney.ca allows for primary content in its most deep and present form to exist and to be easily traceable to a trusted environment and logic and the right authorship, but to have other channels feed into it. In a sense, the more content that exists on Courtney.ca as a source of truth, the less likely it is that residents are being informed from Reddit posts that did not come from the city and did not intentionally convey the right information. So we see Courtney.ca as the linchpin to the strategy in many ways, with all of the other channels in one way or another tracing back to core information held here. Next, looking at the city's Facebook, we see the largest social channel that you're currently operating. And we see a lot of opportunity for this to grow as a primary feeder into Courtney.ca's content, recognizing through the inputs that we gathered in the earlier phase of our work that for many, many residents, this is a primary source of information and dialogue around city activity and communication. And so moving forward, updates, news, and other communications posted to Facebook should feed back to that core content to allow for a chain of information not unlike an evidence custody chain that is traceable back to Courtney.ca. Then looking at Instagram, we see some of the most opportunity for growth in that there's the largest potential for bringing communication material to residents through Instagram in terms of its high usage and format of casual and short content. And so Instagram becomes a prime example of how deeper, more fleshed out content that exists on Courtney.ca can be teased and introduced and segmented into a forum like Instagram that can bring about quick engagement and information sharing while still tracing back to that line of information. Then to quickly cover the traditional channels. And so when we say traditional channels, we're thinking of the tried and true methods that have been seen to work for years for the city in terms of ways of informing residents. And the first that I'll speak to is postering. We have seen that this should be maintained as a viable way of providing specifically on location context, whereas digital channels function to meet residents and audiences where they are in a digital capacity. The postering aspect allows for information to be shared directly in community and physical spaces and can be very effective in introducing topics and events, especially to the communities that they are targeted to. And so we see a lot of opportunity for discretionary use of postering across specific segments of communication activities, which I'll get into a few slides from now. Then to not group these three together, but to speak to them one by one. The first being with direct mail, we see both limitations in terms of paper and resource consumption that need to be thought through, while also recognizing that they're still highly effective when they are deployed. And to draw a bead from some of the feedback that we received in our earlier work, direct mail was highlighted by many equity deserving groups as a primary way of receiving information. And to tease out some of the thinking there, there's such a low barrier to access and entry when it comes to direct mail. It's non-intrusive while still being present in an individual space, and it does not require sophistication of digital access. And so there are still many crucial moments where direct mail is going to be recommended across different segments. Then looking to newsletters, they function as a really strong companion to what we're seeing in Courtney.ca, almost as the index that feeds to the deep library of content that needs to exist. Newsletters allow for a broadcast-like function, in a sense, that allows you to pull together key information as links, sharing it back out to a very broad audience, pulling them back into the authoritative content drawn from Courtney.ca. And then looking at media relations as a program or a category, when it's required, it can quickly become one of the most powerful communication tools available. And so in the strategy that we've supported the development of, we have recommended targeted use of media relations and provided a suite of templates and recommendations and guidelines focused on keeping the required relationships with specific outlets and media entities open and active and fluid into this chain of information, so that when they need to be deployed, it can be done with some ease. Slide. And then the final traditional channel that I'll speak to is in-person events and live streams. And so ultimately, these are valuable and very high engagement activities, whether they're full-scale events or pop-ups across communities. And they're crucial for high leverage moments in key communication events. And we see that these should continue to play a very important role. And we've also addressed how live streaming can or should be relevant in these types of events, along with requirements for what that means in terms of quality and in creating a safe and inclusive space for attendees or viewers. So for example, when thinking of a live stream, recognizing that if it's done through something like Facebook Live, there are also requirements for moderation on top of high quality video and miking, etc., to ensure that anyone engaging either in dialogue or in observation can be doing so in a practical and safe and comfortable way when it's required. Now I'd like to take us, I guess, a level deeper and talk through a bit of the work plan prioritization that we prepared, which I think is really core to this strategy. So by way of maybe introducing work plan prioritization as a concept, the point of this is assessing communication strategy through the feasibility of the communication activities themselves, and ensuring that the appropriate channels are engaged for the best reach across residents. Too much emphasis on one channel for all activities could easily provide, a fulsome, constant stream of information, but only reach a specific audience time and time again. And so there's a need to address channel diversity with different levels of segmentation across the work plan. And also ensuring that the appropriate distribution of resources can be in place to maintain quality communication. Because what can never happen is to be spread too thin across too many channels, across too many activities, because then you might reach the most people that way, but if you're reaching them with ineffective material or content or even production values, it starts to lose both the trust that has been built up and also the reliability. And so in defining work plan prioritization, one of the key goals here has been to understand internal and expected capacity and capability and address that in terms of what channels are leveraged in order to reach the most people the right way. So in designing the prioritization, we assessed different major communication channels and developed recommendations on how each one should be used. And to cater to that, we prepared a segmentation scale that you can see here for types of communication events. So you see LMH for us, we have low segment, medium segment, and high segment communication events. And I want to triple emphasize that this does not denote the importance of the event. It's more a reflection of the resource intensiveness and spread of each segment. So a low communication event segment would have low to moderate interest from residents and are typically recurring events or updates that average about a month. Medium segments have typically moderate interest from residents and are often about 2 months in length and represent things like updates on essential services. And then high segments have naturally high interest from residents and are typically multiple months in duration and quite resource intensive. So looking at the channel load assigned to low segment activities, there's a primary focus on the digital channels for ongoing updates and post content feeding to the website. And the reason that these 3 channels are selected alongside newsletters is to promote a very large reach while allowing for single source content that can be presented through a couple of different mediums to allow for different levels of engagement feeding into the same source. Then looking at medium segment channel loads, you see those same primary channels engaged. And then those that are shown in that lovely sienna tawny color here from your new brand represent discretionary inclusion. And so we never want to create a scenario where we're assuming that one size fits all, because even within a segment, we recognize that there is diversity in topic and that some topics will warrant an extra push or an extra layer of communication effort. And so those that are highlighted here beyond the primary channels from the low segment represent those discretionary communication activities that can be brought in when deemed appropriate. And then looking at the high segment channel load, you can see the majority of channels are engaged as required, meaning that any activity, any communication activity that is deemed to be a high segment should engage all of the teal channels here to ensure the right amount of information is shared over the right amount of time to reach the right people. And that we've included direct mail along with a few of the secondary channels as discretionary, in some cases for emergency services or for specific audiences when relevant. And then I'd like to quickly touch on the forecasting elements of this. And so in many ways, the pieces that we've talked through so far represent the different variables that exist across a communication strategy. And there is a layer of guidance for each channel in terms of the type of content to be creating, the materials and the best way of producing those, alongside the strategies and templates to support that. But when you bring it all together, we have prepared almost a resourcing tool, but really a forecasting algorithm that allows for us to look at the variables that you see here drawn from the previous elements of the strategy to understand the reach, the level of effort, and the diversity that'll take place. And so to speak to each of these quickly, when we talk about channel load as a variable, it's assessing which communication channels function best with which event segments to ensure that the appropriate amounts of information and reach is allotted to those events. Then looking at level of effort, we look at the recommended approaches to producing content that have been designed, gathering involvement from the broader staff, and executing at a continued high level of quality. and we assess what the implications of staff time are for each communication segment per channel. So if we were to talk about, say, producing Instagram content for a low segment communication event, we have defined the level of effort required for that 1 month duration to produce at the right level, at the right cadence, and at the right volume in terms of level of effort impact on Courtney staff itself. Then the work plan, which I'll touch on in a moment, is a projection for 2024 that maps out expected events for all 3 segments per month. And this allows the city team to effectively forecast the effort required per month based on the effort per channel and per segment. And then we've also got 2 critical variables that have been introduced here. The first being that within the tool that's been created and the algorithms that have been designed, we've created the ability for flexibility because, you know, you can create as many segments and categories as you like, but ultimately life happens. And I think we can all agree that we can't foresee every communication event that will occur. And so the strategy speaks in categories and opportunities and channels, but ultimately there are going to be moments where specific channels need to be brought in together to address a pressing concern that has appeared. And so we've introduced the capability for that to still be modeled against the level of efforts that are present to perform communication acts on each individual channel, so they can be introduced individually for 1, 2, 3, or 6 months at a time. And finally, the ability to also include manager tracking as part of this forecasting to represent those scenarios where perhaps a third-party group is supporting on communication activities without losing sight of the fact that there is still a resourcing requirement from somebody in a manager capacity that's providing oversight or review or coordination of those activities. And then just to tease the year in front of us, this is a numeric representation of that work plan forecast to show the amount of currently planned or expected events across each of those segments per month, with the months represented by 1 to 12 along the top here. And this isn't a representation of the best recommended spread of these events. It's the representation of what's currently intended to happen so that all of the strategic requirements, resourcing requirements, and levels of effort needed can be forecast against those to project reality as opposed to an ideal state. And then I'll just close with thanking you again for giving us the space to walk through this, and that we're happy to take any questions that you might have.
Excellent. Thanks very much for the presentation. And while I'm waiting for other council members who may have some questions or comments, one of the things that I didn't see in there, and especially when you were talking about digital content and sort of ways of getting information out there, I didn't see the word YouTube anywhere, which weirdly we're streaming on right now. And I know that YouTube can then be, you know, spread through X and Facebook, et cetera. But it just seemed like something that wasn't there. And I know we've only got about 500 subscribers, but that's about 10 times more than Powell River. So, you know, we're boding well, I think, are not too bad as a city, but I just seen it as sort of a gap there, or just something that wasn't mentioned. I wondered if you had some comments around that.
Absolutely. I'm happy to speak to that. So I think you actually hit the nail on the head in your description there, in that YouTube in many ways is a channel of sharing video, but we have not diagnosed it as a primary channel in terms of strategic definition. And so when I was speaking about live streaming, I used Facebook Live as an example, and that could easily just have been YouTube as well. So it is still present in the recommendations of how to engage. But when we talk about specifically identifying Instagram and Facebook and Courtney.ca and those other channels, we're thinking of what are the unique expressions of content that need to be created. And so to go back to the stance on single sourcing as much as possible, you currently have a small and highly effective team. And for that to continue to flourish as needs grow and change, and we seek to reach more and more individuals, we want to look at what content can be created in its most high fidelity and effective state, and then be repurposed across other spaces. And so in the channels that were described here, you see almost unique expressions of content, but then the ability to disseminate those across other channels, whether it's Facebook Live or YouTube or elsewhere, I think is quite open.
Excellent. Appreciate that. And I just, on that, kudos to our staff. They did put a YouTube video up around solid waste about a month ago, and that's got well over 1,000, maybe 1,500 views. So it is a venue that is getting some views there as well. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Councillor Gillicoeur.
Thanks, Mayor. I didn't even catch the YouTube thing. Yeah, it's not located in the secondary channel analysis, but yeah, thanks to the consultant team on this. I learned a lot, especially in the last section on emergent technologies and AI, and a few channels and digital platforms that I hadn't been aware of. So that made me go down a rabbit hole a few nights ago. So thanks for that. A question around X, formerly known as Twitter. In your PowerPoint slide for primarily my concerns around the high, you had it as that yellow coding. And then in the strategy, which is on page 23 under Twitter, you have for high, medium, and low that it is not required. So I'm wondering if that's a discrepancy there between the PowerPoint slide for high. And then while we're on Twitter, I do appreciate, because one of the things I was really curious around was the recommendation around slowly offboarding from Twitter. But I appreciate on page 23, you also speak to the importance of X in the cases of emergencies. And so I'm wondering, before I pass it over to you, if you can also speak to what you've been seeing with other municipalities or regional districts or other levels of government as it relates to their use of X, as per the recommendation of slowly offboarding from that platform.
Yep, absolutely. I'd be happy to speak to that, and then I might tag in Hillary to reflect on some other municipalities here. But so first off, it's not a mismatch between the strategy and the PowerPoint. So that lovely tawny sienna color that I've honestly grown to love, to the point where I purchased a jacket of that same color after seeing your rebrand. For what it's worth. It's not required for any event segment. So that color is meant to highlight when we recommend that it be used discretionarily. And so Twitter/X is a very interesting and volatile platform right now. And while it is going through some sometimes concerning, sometimes awkward shifts, it does still provide a vital function in specific scenarios. So thinking of emergency moments, many people still look to Twitter/X as their first source of up-to-the-minute real-time information from their trusted sources, whether it's got the blue check mark that you pay for or not. And so when we deem it as discretionary for high segment communication events, it's the thinking that some of those might not be emergencies. Some of them might be long-term plans that are being shared over months at a time, but some of them may be emergencies. And so primarily for the sake of forecasting levels of effort and content production, knowing that the city team has the ability to turn on or off the forecasting of Twitter for a specific event when required, was a crucial component of this, but we didn't want to deem it as required blanket for any communication segment because of that offboarding element. And then speak to the offboarding side of things, we do not recommend shutting down city's Twitter, because in emergency moments, it will still provide vital function, but the day-to-day posting of information and deep conversation that once took place on Twitter should slowly become the resharing of content designed for other channels that feeds back to more trusted sources like the Courtney website. And then to speak to your acknowledgement of the emerging trends and platforms section, there are multiple new platforms coming into the picture, but it's too early to know what will take Twitter's place. We don't know if it'll be Threads. We don't know if it'll be something else. It might be something that hasn't been invented yet. It might be one of the many apps that I'm trying to build in my spare time, I hope. But regardless, we want to make sure that the city still maintains that presence on Twitter for those pivotal moments, while also recognizing that it's not the effective social media platform for general communication that it once was.
Great.
Hill, if you want to speak to maybe what you've seen with other cities.
Yeah, I can very quickly follow up, which is just to say, I think a lot of municipalities are stuck in this space right now, which is it is helpful in emergency communication still, particularly when you've already got a community on there. But I think you are seeing a lot of people divesting the energy that they're putting, in particular, also because it helps keep your staff more safe because of the volatility on that platform, in particular, in regard to the conversations that are sometimes happening there. There's no way to block anyone on that platform anymore. So the safeguards that used to exist in that space aren't really there. So what we make the recommendation for, and you're seeing a lot of folks, is track the space, continue to look at what happens here, keep it as an emergency option. No need to like deactivate your account, but be really intentional when you want to put your staff in that space where they actually have to engage in that community, which hasn't been going typically very well over the last year.
Yeah, thanks. And just one last comment, Mayor, is just really wanted to share my appreciation for the extensive outreach to equity seeking groups in understanding their preferences and how they access and the explanation around where they like to go to and then where to next. And I think that really helps for us to understand how to reduce barriers and gaps in accessing citizens in all walks of life. So thanks for the time in doing that work.
Excellent. Thanks, Councillor Jolicoeur. And yeah, small follow-up on that emergency communications. Again, something that I saw lacking. And unfortunately, this is where I spend most of my side gig time. So so I have a little bit of knowledge there. But some municipalities, in fact, our regional district many years ago started doing direct to text for emergency, that kind of thing. And I didn't see that on the list. I didn't mention it before, but I didn't know if you don't really have to comment on it because I know it's another thing out there, but I didn't know if that's important or not. And I'll maybe pass it over to Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Great, thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Zakir and Hillary. This was anyway, I enjoyed reading the report. I think we've got good plans ahead of us, and it'll up our game. And although I think we're obviously doing fairly well, because I at dinner tables in both Victoria and Vancouver over the course of the holidays, I had people say, "So I hear you're going to automated collection in Courtenay. That's exciting." I question their view of what's exciting, but I was amazed that we had that kind of reach already in terms of getting our message out. I wanted to ask something, and I think it's possibly outside the scope of this, which is maybe why it's not so much there, is part of the direct role that we as councillors have is responding to, in a reactive sense, to the public, people who've heard things and then have questions or queries or opinions they'd like to share with us. And I didn't see that kind of reactive piece covered there so much. I think the newsletter part of that could be converted into some of the key messages, and talking points could be used. But I think I know I've found, I've heard others mention this as well, that often we don't have that clear, consistent, reactive message, not reactive in the sense, but responding quickly and coherently to questions that arise. And it leaves, sometimes we'll ask staff to produce sort of response so we can make sure that it's coherent, but given, staff demands on their time and turnaround times, work weeks, it often means that councillors are having to sort of improvise on the message. And I think we generally do a pretty good job. And I call it Councillor Hillian particularly for the impressive work he does answering people. But it's really a very important part of what happens. And I think I've mentioned this to I was talking to some elected officials at a conference recently, and they said, well, if it's operational, then your staff do it, and if it's policy of the city, then it would be the mayor's office who would do that. And that's a larger discussion, but it would be helpful if part of our communication strategy was about providing in a very timely and even proactive, like anticipating what points of confusion or points of clarification are going to be, of developing that material so it's there when you need it, rather than having received 12 emails and then asking staff if they could help sort of to find something, and then 2 days later being able to respond. And again, it's not something we've asked our staff to do, so I'm not trying to make any kind of complaint there. I'm just wondering about how we could integrate that reactive piece into the communication strategy. It's a long question. Thanks.
Of course. No, it's a good question, Counselor, and I think I have good news for you in that at a foundational level that has been addressed within the strategy and the associated templates that have been prepared. But what you observed was that we didn't dare to call you out by name as the recipients of some of those elements, because we did want to leave flexibility. So we did speak to the broader terms of designated spokespeople, as an example. But what's been done in terms of the content strategy and preparation side of what's been created is all communication event activities and segments being paired with key messaging documents and FAQ documents that are given to this group as part of the event communication process, so that key messages and details are communicated and shared, and that all messaging, and whether it's reactivity or planned communication, does stem from the same almost script and facts and truth. And we have prepared templates for those elements alongside the strategy itself.
I'll let you do a follow-up, Councillor Cole Hamilton.
I just a brief response. I had read through this, but I had seen Ms. O'Connell was pointing out on page 14. I'd seen those more as initial communications with the public, those particular pieces. But you're saying those are also going to be prepared for in response situations as well. So that sounds like that's all being included in the plan. So good news. Thanks very much.
Love giving you good news.
Well, and I think, you know, and it's long anticipated for the website revamp, which hopefully will help control some of the pathways of where information and questions get pointed to. But I do have to really support Councillor Cole Hamilton's assessment of Councillor Hillion's ability to answer emails in a very articulate and quick way. It's much appreciated. Just so everybody knows and it's on record. Councillor Morin.
Great, thanks, Mayor. We're communicating a fair amount about this communication strategy. We're a pretty communicative group here. So yeah, I think this is really, really well done. I mean, we've just been, our staff has just been progressively getting better and better at communication throughout this process. You know, I think we're answering some of those criticisms that I think we had maybe when I was in early in last term, where we were getting a bit of criticism around not enough communication. But having said that, you can lead a horse to water and you can't make them drink. And I'll explain that by saying that I communicate a fair amount on my own social media, and, you know, get a good amount of views and stuff. But what got the most views and comments was my new regional district photograph. So I had people contacting me about the solid waste, which I had all over my social media. I had people contacting me who were on my page where all the information is there, asking me questions about stuff that the city has done an amazing job communicating about with the solid waste for more than a year. But yeah, what gets the attention is my new photograph. So I mean, I think I say that because I think this happens with what the city, you know, the things that people actually go to, they seem to not necessarily see all the other communication or so I just think staff's doing a great job, and I like how this report lays out all those different mechanisms. My one comment around the specific methods was the in-person events. And I find that there's such an opportunity there to use so many different methods within that, because you can do a video at the in-person event. You obviously are engaging face-to-face. Then those folks go and they post something or react, and then you've got your other social media stuff. So I just wondered if, I know you've got a description in here about those in-person events, but I just wondered if there was anything more you could say about the benefit, or if you think there's any benefit to having more of that kind of communication, or just what your thoughts are on that. Thanks.
I can jump in. with a preliminary answer, and then Zakir will probably have more to say. I hope it's okay, Councillor Moore, and I'd like to also just deeply validate that, like you were saying, you can lead a horse to water, but they might not read it. It's so true, and I even think about what we heard in our equity deserving workshops when folks spoke to the capacity of the individuals in the communities that they serve to actually bring in this much information, and I think that's really important as well. So I just wanted to name that because you're mirroring back some of what we heard through that workshop too. In-person events, we've put them as discretionary in our middle, and then as recommended in our third, because they're really good for relationship building. Like when that's something, if it's a trickier project, or if it's something that you know that it would be really helpful to speak face to face, that's really helpful when you can do in-person events. We've also seen some municipalities, and I know Kate and Anne have been thinking about this as well, adopt events like a Super Saturday or things like that, where in community you can you can feature information about multiple projects at once, which also really helps from a resourcing perspective too. So you get the benefits of the in-person, you get to provide information on a range of projects, but you don't have to worry about the draws on staff capacity to be doing that for every project all the time. So I just wanted to flag that because I think that's a really neat idea.
That I love that idea. I think that's great. And I think even some of our more controversial topics, you know, when you're face to face with someone having a conversation, and you know, with me, it's usually my grandson's tugging on my arm, and you're at the farmer's market, you know, people settle down a little bit, and you can have that relational conversation, and whether that's with staff as well, where people are not just sort of behind the keyboard with a lot of emotion. So I think there's some benefit to those in-person events, and I do know they take resources. And I wanted to say I did appreciate the comments on my social media, and maybe I was the escapism for the night, because it was just so much heaviness with all the other stuff on social media. So I was sort of you know, that photo was just easy to digest and not have to think about all the other problems in our city. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Councillor Moore, and really appreciate the comments. And Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm going to suggest that we move along so we can all have time to go and check out Councillor Moran's photo. I'd like to move that council approve the City of Courtenay communication strategy. Thanks.
It's been moved and seconded. Thanks so much. I had one last comment. I was trying to keep it to the end here, but well, one, I have to. I was wrong on that cart video. It was 2,500 views, which is pretty good for a month in the Comox Valley. So yeah, exactly. So and well done as well. So but and of course, one of the benefits of YouTube, besides being able to be embedded, is you also don't have to have an account like Facebook, which is a thing. But my more serious question, just because I've seen a couple of municipalities and government entities that have been flagged as media, and therefore their posts can no longer be seen on Facebook. And so I don't know if you have any comments or concerns around that, but I certainly do, just seeing how it's a nebulous organization that probably has some AI figuring out if you're media or not. So just wondering if you have a thought or two on that.
I do. I have many, actually. This is a pretty big topic for us. It's on our minds often. And the logic here in terms of the strategy and recommendations moving forward comes down to why there's no single channel strategy. And so if something gets flagged as media and can't be shared on Facebook, you can still lean on Courtenay.ca and Instagram and the newsletter. There should always be a fallback cadence. So in the assessments that we've done, we see the spread and reach of these different channels. And part of the logic of how they've been paired together for recommendations for different segments is that overlap itself. And so even if in the worst timeline, all social accounts have been flagged as media and information can't be shared by the city, you have the newsletter, you have the website, and you have a few of the traditional channels available to use, that no matter what, you can get crucial information to people.
Awesome. Really appreciate that comment. And without further ado, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that's unanimous. So thank you so much for your presentation today. It's much appreciated, and to staff who I know have been working away on this for quite some time. It is great to see this coming to another critical point. So thanks so much for that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Councillor Jolicoeur.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I'm looking to see if we can get consent to amend the agenda. I think there's a large group in the audience here that is waiting for agenda item 9.1.1.
CBRD staff have another meeting, so we're stuck on kind of keeping.
Which is the next agenda item?
Yes.
Okay.
CBRD.
So I'll come back after that item.
Okay. All right. So external reports and correspondence. We have the CBRD board request for consent on the Comox Valley Sports Track and Field Service Conversion Bylaw. And I will pass it over to the staff. I think I'm set. Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Mr. Garbett.
Thank you, through the mayor to council. We have in front of you the referral from the CVRD required in order to confirm the city of Courtenay's participation in the sports track and field service. CVRD staff are here if we have any questions. It's very well understood, I believe, amongst these council members, as given our role at the CVRD board. So we have that for council's consideration. That's all on that topic.
All right, so we'll just move it over to questions and start with Councillor Frisch.
Thanks, Mayor. I was actually going to suggest that I make the motion to get it on the table if you're comfortable with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll move that the city of Courtenay consent to the adoption of the Comox Valley Regional District Bylaw number 795, being Comox Valley Sports Track and Field Service Conversion Bylaw number 2553, 2001, amendment number 2 under section 346 of the Local Government Act.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. That's great. I don't see any. Yeah, okay. If you'd like to speak to it, I'll let you speak to it. Sure.
Well, just super quickly, I appreciate the report and commend the regional district board for moving forward on these really exciting projects that I think will be beneficial. I looked at the numbers, of course, what it's going to mean for taxpayers, and the numbers seem reasonable considering the 3 large projects that I think are much needed in our growing community. So that's all. Thanks.
All right, thanks so much. And Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to just maybe expand a bit upon the turf field which is involved here, and I think it's interesting to note that it's not only for soccer, which is perhaps what people might initially think about, but also for lacrosse, for an overlapping U15 baseball field, and also as a practice space for rugby and football. So this is this is a multi-purpose field, which is going to, we're very lucky here on Vancouver Island to have the ability to play field sports in the winter. And this is going to increase the capacity for physical activity for people of all ages in our community. I think it's, well understood the physical and mental health benefits of physical activity. And these are inexpensive sports to enter, and also inexpensive facilities as compared to, say, ice sheets or swimming pools. And I think it's part of what we need for a growing community. It's not just roads and pipes that you need when you're growing your community, but it's parks, it's playing fields, it's fire halls, libraries, community centers. And given that this morning, apparently, according to U-Haul, we're the number 5 destination in the country for people moving. And second in BC after Kelowna, it seems wise for us to get our ducks in a row to make sure that we're able to continue enjoying that quality of life into the future. So I look forward to voting in favor of this.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cole Hamilton, for articulating those comments. I had talked with Councillor McCollum, but I would not have done as good a job. But she also was very much in support of this. I think those that know her would be aware of that. We have the motion on the floor. I think it's been articulated well, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that passes unanimously. Excellent. All right, next on here, we have the solid waste automation. Oh, Councillor Jolicoeur.
The evening, and I'm just recognizing we're also in a bus strike, and so there may be individuals here who, the large group that's here for 9.1.1, so I'm looking for consent to amend the agenda to move that to our next item.
Okay, Okay, it's been second. I'll call the question. All those in favor? All right, so we'll, is that going to affect any other presenters? I know we had CVRD who have already left the building, so Mr. Garbutt.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, I was just anticipating the matter getting referred to Ms. O'Connell for a introduction, so sorry, I hit my button too early.
All right, that's all good. Ms. O'Connell.
Thanks very much, Council. I'm happy to be here. We started this process almost a year ago, and I'm presenting you tonight the Parks and Open Spaces Regulation Bylaw for Council's consideration of first and second reading. The bylaw sought to achieve a variety of objectives, including clarity and guidance, protection of natural and cultural areas, sheltering, authority and accountability, enforcement and penalties, smoking and vaping in parks, future-proofing, and legal compliance. The bylaw contains a myriad of policy statements regarding parks permitting, providing economic development opportunities, sheltering, smoking, vehicle use, delegation of authority, animal control, cannabis and alcohol consumption, and the protection of environmental and culturally sensitive areas. The guiding document was approved by Council in November, and the bylaw before you tonight was designed to reflect Council's vision for Courtenay's parks and public spaces, and I believe finds a balance between access and enforcement, ensuring our parks and public spaces are available for all of our community members and visitors to enjoy. The bylaw is just one tool in our Peaceful Communities Toolkit. Combined with a newly adopted bylaw policy and bylaw compliance strategy, bylaw services will seek to raise awareness and understanding of the expectations and regulations, will seek voluntary compliance, and implement a compliance approach if voluntary compliance cannot be achieved and it is appropriate to do so. I recognize the bylaw is a written legal document and therefore may not be completely accessible to all members of our community. Fret not, we have a plan. To increase the accessibility of the information contained within the bylaw, in 2024, the city will be launching a series of good neighbor guides on various user groups and personas that will convey in plain language expectations regarding a variety of bylaw areas, including one for parks goers, that will outline key expectations for individuals and groups who are accessing and using our park spaces. This Good Neighbor Guide will also be accompanied by a series of informative short videos. With that, the staff recommendation is that Council give first and second reading to the Parks and Open Spaces Regulation Bylaw, bylaw number 3121, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Awesome, thanks so much for that. And are there any questions or comments? Councilor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Maybe I'll just make a quick comment and then, if there's comment from staff about my comment, that's good too. I guess what I'm wanting to share with the public today is that this document isn't about opening up our community for camping and sleeping everywhere and anywhere. And in fact, it's in response to a need for people to have a place to sleep in the province saying, in Canada saying, look, it's got to happen. This doesn't resolve any of the major issues that cause people to need a place to sleep, but it does draw a line in the sand, allowing us to say where that's acceptable and how we can deal with things that we as a community can agree are unacceptable, and we can't have people sleeping in, like was mentioned, ecologically sensitive areas, places that are unsafe. And so, it really is, a difficult bylaw to even contemplate. But the fact is people are sleeping on the streets right now. They are sleeping in parks. And we need to do our part of managing that, I guess is the best way to put it. Hopefully coming from the province and the federal government is more money to actually deal with the real problems that lead people to homelessness. And so I guess I'm showing my support right now, and I'll be voting in favor of this. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Frisch and Councillor Schilker.
Thanks, Mayor. This is probably one of the items since I've become an elected official that I've had the most excitement, but also the most challenge with. I think part of this bylaw, a great part of this bylaw is okay with me, but a large part of this, I think those that perhaps have more tension and controversy in the community really believe is an unfortunate reality of failing systems that we're having to enact bylaws to restrict people's dignity of having a shelter. And that's the reality that we're in 2024, that we're having to, as Councillor Fish said, find a balance, but also I really hope that this continues to be something that we can use to advocate to other levels of government to say it's not enough for us to have to regulate people living in our parks. We need to have dignified living for people. It's been a hard bylaw for me to review. There was a few things that I brought up to staff, and I appreciate their time with me earlier this week on this. Over the last few months, I think that we've had an opportunity to be brought through a process. I understand that the community was quite engaged in the policy process. We approved that policy a few meetings ago. But when I did read this, and I appreciate staff spoke to the language in this being, and as it relates to accessibility, but I really do believe there was some good work done at the policy level, and there's components of that policy that I don't feel are reflected in this bylaw as it's read now. I think the reference to individuals' human rights is referred to only once, whereas a lot of the process we were brought through a few months ago with the consultant had a lot of that, and we spoke about trauma-informed practices and reducing stigma. And I appreciate that staff have said that this bylaw doesn't exist in a vacuum, that it exists within the confines of the bylaw for compliance and the policy related to parks and open spaces. And so I'm actually more supportive of this going back to staff to do further engagement with community. There's the age-old saying of nothing about us without us. And I think that was done to some extent at the policy stage. But I would really like to hear from community members and groups who represent marginalized individuals in the community, unhoused individuals, people who use drugs, to understand how the bylaw as it's written might be impacting them. Of course, this is one of the documents that it's marked up all over my iPad here. I have lots of specific comments, but if I don't see anyone, I think I see one other colleague, but really the sections I'm looking at is 5.8, 5.9, 5.10, and sections enforcement and penalty. And I will speak to one that kind of really came out to me, and staff did respond, and it's section 5.10, which is interaction with city employees. And I appreciate at the policy phase, staff spoke a little bit about this. And of course, we want to ensure that our staff are safe in all the activities that they do on behalf of the city and in their place of work. I guess the timing of this is the first bylaw that I understand this language is being included in, for me, makes it appear that those who would potentially have infractions with this bylaw might be more dangerous or more violent or cause more issues to our city employees. I know that that's likely not the intent, but given the environment that we're in, with vigilantism and a lot of stigma in our community right now, that really spoke out to me. So I'd love to hear from staff, particularly sub bullets C and D. We have heard from community members there have been issues with advocates and activists who are supporting unhoused individuals during a bylaw enforcement activity, that there have been issues. And so language like interfering with a bylaw officer and performing their duties, including issuing tickets and notices, is prohibited. And so I do worry around the important role that advocates and activists play in supporting marginalized people in our community when they are interfacing with our staff, particularly bylaw staff.
Thank you, Councillor Jolicoeur. I just want to clarify you mentioned the regulation regarding drugs. The only drugs that are regulated within this are cannabis and alcohol and tobacco. So any other illicit drug, the reference is to comply with the federal regulation and any provincial statutes or amendments. So the city in that and through the policy scope, it was communicated to me and through council that the folks who requested the amendment to the federal act are the experts in harm reduction, and we want to follow their lead. So that also aligns with the future proofing criteria for the policy or the bylaw as well. So in the event other amendments are made through the province, we will automatically be in compliance with that. So there is no regulation of illicit drugs under this bylaw, and that was never the intent. Regarding the interaction with staff, as an employer, we do have an obligation first and foremost to provide our employees with a safe work environment. As you mentioned, I think some of the interactions you're specifically thinking or looking at a certain group. Honestly, the majority of violent or concerning interactions are with individuals with off-leash dogs. And or other types of drinking that are taking place in the park from a recreational perspective. Outside of parks and public spaces, parking enforcement is actually our other most concerning or conflict-based area. So this is one of those pieces where it's really just stipulating that this type of, when we bring back the traffic control bylaw this year or the animal control bylaw, you're going to see the exact same language. This really is not intended to focus on a specific population. This applies to all residents, and there's about 1,000 different potential interactions based on all the policy areas across all of our parks that may occur. And so what may look one way in one circumstance and another in a different circumstance will likely be driven by the bylaw policy itself. So coming at things from a place of curiosity, compassion, trauma-informed practice, those types of things. This isn't intended to create a wedge or drive a wedge between a vulnerable individual and their advocacy group.
Let's see the floor to others.
Thanks very much, Councillor Jolicoeur and Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks for all the work involved in this process. We did get a communication from staff earlier today. I'm assuming perhaps in response to questions from Councillor Jolicoeur, indicating that we're dealing with first and second reading tonight. There would be an opportunity for some public feedback to be taken and considered at third reading and potentially some amendments. I'm just wondering whether staff envisioned anything in particular in regards to how community feedback might be received. Are we simply talking about interested people in the community, agencies and otherwise getting in touch with staff and council, or are we actually looking at some specific form of engagement around this bylaw?
Thank you, Councillor Hillian. As part of the project, there was an engagement strategy that was developed and implemented. I would actually look to Councillor Jolicoeur and with curiosity as to what or who he would see the referral going to. It was extremely intentional to not bring this bylaw out more broadly. There are a lot of different user groups with a variety of perspectives that the city may or may not be able to fully consider through an engagement platform or process, especially when it comes to questions around human rights. So specifically the human right to shelter within our parks. Although we did review things like the restricted park list and the criteria with unhoused population, the HRT and the coalition and others we interviewed, we did not take that broadly because it's a human rights based issue. We wanted input from the groups that were going to be the most greatly impacted. So I would look to Councillor Jolicoeur to see who he would be looking to have this referred to for further consultation.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Thanks very much, Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I appreciate Councillor Jolicoeur bringing up some of those concerns, and I also appreciate the memo we did get from staff clarifying some points earlier today. Yeah, interesting. Your comments about where we have the most difficulty with bylaw enforcement is with not people sheltering in parks. I guess when I look at, I think it's 5.9 and the language around, 5.9b, disorderly, dangerous, or offensive behavior. I guess I'm wondering about the subjectivity of that, and if you could give an example of when that would be put into play, because what I deem to be offensive could be very different from what somebody else deems to be offensive. And again, we know that some of the folks who are in those vulnerable positions of sheltering in parks do experience much more stigma and actually pretty awful treatment by members of the public. So I wouldn't want them to be disproportionately impacted because their behavior is, you know, different, unusual, maybe causes some concern for people, but I just want to know what the sort of definition of how that would be applied. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So in regard to language around disorderly or offensive behavior, really the question around discretion comes from what would be the test of reasonability. So what do you, or what would the majority of folks feel is disorderly? An example is actually not one that I would say is referred in regard to individuals who may be unhoused or experiencing mental health and or addiction related behavioral challenges. That is absolutely not what the focus of this is. Think more of the permitted beer garden for the local baseball tournament that's taken place and somebody has had a few too many drinks and maybe getting a little more offensive and or rowdy and or physical with their behavior. It may not be a criminal matter that requires the involvement in the RCMP, but it does allow us to approach them, to issue infractions, and to potentially have them removed from the park spaces. So again, remembering the principles around the bylaw policy, which is first around education, second around that trauma-informed, culture-informed, and approaching with curiosity. If an individual was in a state of mental crisis, that would not be a bylaw enforcement related issue where we would elevate to enforcement. Those are the circumstances where our standard operating procedures would kick in, and we would likely look to reach out to something like the PAC teams when they're in place to try and assist us. The principles of bylaw enforcement in any approach that you take is to seek compliance. Penalizing an individual who is in a vulnerable position or struggling with more significant issues like being unhoused or mental health and or addiction related issues, issuing a ticket is not effective to achieve compliance. Connecting them with outreach services is. So based on the policy approved by council, you would not see an enforcement component to that. What you would see is a conversation, a check-in. Are you okay? Did you know that this is probably not the best place? Do we need to phone someone for you? Can we get someone here to help you out?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I do understand that the policy is in tandem. And I think this is one of those examples going back to our previous presentation where we really need robust communications that really, really spells this stuff out, because it's an area that can be very easily misunderstood. I don't know if it's possible. I know the bylaw language itself is legalese, but it would be really great to try to incorporate some of that language into that bylaw that's in the policy to show that this is the intent of this. What I don't want to see is what we're seeing in other communities that are bylaws that are harmful, that are punitive. And I don't want to see that same. I don't want this bylaw to be on the news tomorrow as another one of those punitive bylaws towards the most vulnerable in our community. So I don't know if we're able to put some language into this bylaw that makes it more aligned with the policy. That you did such a great job. And I know that we train our staff with cultural sensitivity and anti-stigma and trauma informed, and we have amazing staff. And I would actually like us to stand out for that and our different approach compared to other communities. I would like this bylaw to stand out as an example of a different compassionate approach to this. That's what I'd like to see. Thanks.
I'm happy to say we have included intent statements within the bylaw. That my understanding through external legal counsel is the first time this has been done in the province. As an example, the intent statement regarding sheltering in parks recognizes human rights, recognizes that park users, while addressing the root causes of homelessness and poverty through inclusive strategies. So we do have intent statements to an extent within here, but really it's the policy approach that helps with the interpretation and the application of the bylaw. This is leading edge as far as including things that aren't solely regulatory, to help with that interpretation, to entrench it more into a bylaw than has been previously done before. Whereas these types of statements would have been solely left to an external document. Ours is unique in the sense that it does incorporate it directly into the bylaw itself to assist with the interpretation over time.
Sorry, would you mind saying, did you call that the lawyer called it, what did you say, leading edge?
Leading edge, yes.
Yeah, so I'd
And they were
love to see
hopeful
that
others would
quoted
take
in the
it.
media, actually, that this is very different from what we've seen across the province. Thank you.
Mr.
My apologies, there's others.
You don't need to speak to that in particular. Okay, thanks, Councillor Moran, for that, and Ms. O'Connell, and again, I think it really speaks to how over the past few years our bylaw modernization has. I mean, we are way ahead of everybody else, and I just really want to give kudos to staff and our council for providing that direction. So, with that, Councillor Hillian.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to share an observation. I see some parallels between this situation and the solid waste bylaw that we brought in just before Christmas. And we actually had a full gallery that night, many more people than are here tonight, mostly seniors who were worried about the terms in that bylaw, and that if they made a mistake and put the wrong thing in the wrong container to do with their solid waste, that they would get fined, that they would have people snooping in their garbage. And we really had to do a fair amount of work to reassure people that that wasn't the intent, that bylaws by their nature need to have language in them that provides for enforcement where that's necessary. But that the city's approach, as Ms. O'Connell has indicated, is to seek compliance, to seek voluntary compliance, and to use the principles that guide the actions of staff in that regard. And hopefully over time, those people who were here and the others in the community who were worried about the so-called garbage police, that a sensational article in the local newspaper implanted those fears. Hopefully those people will be reassured by the practice that unfolds. And I think that it's good that we can air these concerns. And, you know, I would encourage anyone in the public who has specific concerns about either the language or tone or specific aspects of the bylaw to get in touch with members of council between now and when third reading comes up, so that we can speak to those directly, change them if necessary, or provide some explanatory comments in that regard. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Hillian. And I think to your point, you know, whether we use either of those examples, but the solid waste one, you know, the ambassador program has been in place for, you know, 5 or 6 years. So, you know, the idea that something was going to change radically because of a document was, you know, unfortunately misplaced. And I think, again, our bylaw training has been exemplary. I'll pass over to Ms. O'Connell for a comment.
Thank you for opening that door. On that note, one of the pieces is under the previous bylaw, the current one, until and when such time this one is adopted, sheltering in parks is completely prohibited. And I can tell you, in the 3 years I've worked here and been responsible for bylaw, we have never issued a ticket to an unhoused individual. It has not occurred. And in the event that, say, the RCMP issued a ticket, and I have checked this, so I can say definitively, the last one was issued in 2019. It was for open alcohol, and we literally have a separate column. We put that in under no fixed address. We never follow up, and we don't issue those tickets. So just like we haven't issued a ticket for the solid waste bylaw, we also haven't issued tickets for individuals who are sheltering or any of the related activities that they engage in within our parks and public spaces. That is not going to change. The approach is and will remain the same. And if not, it will only continue to enhance as our learning and understanding and our connections and relationships continue to grow over time as we become more involved in the community.
Thanks, Ms. O'Connell. And I think that's, you know, I really appreciate this being brought up, because again, I think, you know, things kind of, especially with the solid waste article that came out, you know, just that sort of I can't really explain where it came from, because it certainly wasn't based on what's been happening. So, but I appreciate us getting that information out as best we can as we move forward through this process, so we don't have a repeat of that. Councillor Jolicoeur.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. And that is news to me that there hasn't been. That's not what my understanding was. So thanks for sharing that. The section that also is new for me to see enforcement and penalty 10.1, and to Councillor Morin's point, I do appreciate the first sub bullets under each section have the intent. I love that. It provides some rationale and really the intent of the following statements below that. And given that we have the policy and our bylaw compliance policy as well, which we passed in early December, which you spoke to, Ms. O'Connell, in terms of the education and really meeting people where they're at. That's not in this intent. So that would be one of the things that I would look to, is some sort of indication that it's not as follows. Because if you just read the intent and then 10.2, 10.3, and 10.4, it's quite punitive, which in my judgment is quite punitive, which is not necessarily what our bylaw compliance policy speaks to. So I'm wondering, we had a few options in the staff report. I'm more inclined to move the second option, which is first and second reading approval with direction to staff. And there'd be some things here that I'd be looking at, similar to what Councillor Morin has suggested. And in terms of your question around who to consult with, I think that the engagement strategy that we used for the policy process was a great process. It came to us, we approved it. I would just look to going back to that same process, that same group of individuals and groups for the bylaw specifically, because I think from my understanding, some of the language in the bylaw was a little bit of a surprise for those user groups. And so that would be my recommendation. I think that engagement that we've engaged with so far was a great process. So that would be the groups that I would look to both write to council, as Councillor Hillian said, but also to be engaged in a process to make sure that they're included in this bylaw going forward. Thank you.
In regard to the intent statement regarding enforcement and penalty, just to clarify, this applies to every regulation within the bylaw. And there may be some circumstances where the policy may result in different approaches for different folks. So for example, someone who may be wanting to conduct business within the parks versus a recreational user group versus someone who is riding an e-bike versus an individual who may be sheltering in the park, to be very specific and apply things like cultural and trauma-informed practice within the enforcement and penalty section may prove problematic, but that's something that we could have legal review. In regard to going back to further engagement, this is something that is possible. It will take a significant amount of time. Again, that process took place over the course of about 6 months. We did engage an external consultant. The budget for this project has now been fully exhausted. So we would have to look at bringing back a report as to what that would entail and the potential implications on other council strategic priorities that I'm currently working on, as well as the bylaw division impacts.
And Councillor Morin.
Thanks, Mayor. Hopefully this will be my last comment. Yeah, I guess I'm not opposed to proceeding, because people do have an opportunity to write in, and we do have an opportunity to make amendments, language changes or whatever, based on that feedback. And because we do have a few folks here interested in this bylaw, I really do encourage people to write in and contact our staff as well if there are examples of where the practice is not aligning with our values and our policy, because I know that our managers take that really seriously, and we want to make sure that those alignments are there. And I don't know what the situation is, but maybe there are some punitive things happening out there, and there's confusion about who that is and whether they're connected to the city or not, I don't know. And I just want to say that I do really appreciate that we're protecting those environmentally sensitive areas. That was so needed. It's heartbreaking to go out, and we know that people need shelter, but we really want to protect those environmentally sensitive areas as well. And we have struck a balance with still having places to shelter. And my understanding is that when the consultation took place, that the folks who are sheltering were very supportive of that as well. They understand that the importance of that. And just around the analogy with the garbage collection, I do see that there's a bit of a parallel there. I also see though that when you're in a vulnerable position where you're already experiencing stigma, these things land harder than someone who is in a home in that power imbalance is there. So people feel more vulnerable sometimes to this language. So I just want to note that as well, that not to minimize anyone's experience, whether they're concerned about the garbage collection and potential punitive measures, that that's a valid concern. But I also think that people who are already in those vulnerable positions, already experiencing stigma, and really they're exposed to the public, they're in a very different position. So I just wanted to bring that up as well. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morin. Just in regard to where the opportunities currently exist for outreach organizations and or advocacy representatives to raise issues, should they be occurring within the field, our bylaw manager participates in the homelessness response team meetings after a brief hiatus during a temporary gap in the position. They're also part of the situation table. The Director of Recreation, Culture and Community Services is also involved in a lot of those discussions and interacts directly with organizations such as Community Cares and the CVTS and the Coalition. We've also just brought on the brand new resource of a community services coordinator that will further seek to enhance those partnerships. And the development and further enhancement of those partnerships was explicitly outlined in the bylaw compliance strategy over the course of the next 3 years, and really represented, I would say, at least half of the strategic priorities that are going to take place over the next 24 months. So if there are issues taking place in the community, there are plenty of opportunities for those to be raised at current engagements that we're involved in. So if there is an issue, we take those very seriously. We have processes for investigating accusations against our staff. We have standard operating procedures that are reviewed regularly and are updated when we do go through new learning and training. So we really believe we're doing what we can and are trying to be involved in as many areas that we can to keep that line of communication open. And if there's more information to be done, those are really good avenues. At the same time, I have also personally offered to be a receptacle for complaints in the event that someone feels that they can go to myself or the manager or even the city manager, or any member of council can raise those issues as well.
Thanks so much for that follow-up, and Councillor Morin for your comments. Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, before we wrap, I just want to thank all of my colleagues for their comments and the work that went into this, and Ms. O'Connell's leadership. And I think we had quite a long discussion back in September when the policy report came in, and we reflected on the consultation that happened. And it wasn't just with organizations. It included Coalition, their leadership team, who I see in the room here today, the homeless response team, as well as individual members of the unhoused community. And I was impressed to see that one of the statements in the September staff report saying this inclusive approach saw concern transform into shared support and laid the foundation for ongoing cooperation and potential partnerships. And that's not an easy thing to do. And I have respect for everyone involved for getting to that place. you know, we unanimously supported the principles that came in the September report. And after reviewing the bylaw, the draft bylaw, I see it as reflecting those principles. But that's me. I'm not in anyone else's shoes. And this is the time where people can tell us if they see a distinction between the process they were a part of, that they felt good about, and the end product. And I appreciate Ms. O'Connell listing the many, many ways in which the city is proactively going out and trying to solicit feedback. And beyond that, you can write to any of us, talk to any of us. Like, it's this is the time between now and third reading to make this better, if it can be made better. And I think, although I understand where my colleague Councillor Jolicoeur is coming from, with wanting another more robust round of consultations, I'm thinking that this will this opportunity between now and third reading is an opportunity for feedback. And while sometimes in governance you have to balance priorities, and I know there's a lot of other important work that Ms. O'Connell is doing and her colleagues, and to have to put that aside would delay other important things that need to be done. So I think the option I'll be supporting will be to support first and second reading, and look forward to hearing from members of the community who have thoughts they want to share about ways in which this could possibly be improved in the meantime. And I just thank everyone for coming out this evening and for wading through a lot of less than interesting reports. Interesting to us, but that's why we're here. And thank you for your participation and support for the process.
Thanks very much, Councillor Cole-Hamilton and Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to move the recommendation that council give first and second reading to the Parks and Open Spaces Regulation Bylaw number 3121. The staff be authorized to prepare a bylaw amendment to the Municipal Ticket Information Bylaw number 2435, 2006 for council consideration.
It's been moved and seconded, and Councillor Jolicoeur.
Yeah, I won't be supporting the recommendation. When staff said that there would be increased costs, I mean, you know, this is one of those pieces where, you know, it's not like a parking bylaw where a person has a vehicle and goes home at night. This bylaw impacts people's livelihoods and their well-being, and in many ways, their dignity as a human being and their human rights. And I know that we've done a great job of trying to balance that. I do feel like there is an opportunity to do further engagement. I think there's time. I know this section under substance use, D spoke to the provincial regulations. There's an injunction between now and March that will be hopefully figured out in the courts. That might change. So I do believe that we have some time here, and we've taken our time to date. The concerns I've heard from community members are not insignificant. I myself have my own concerns as it's drafted at the moment. And I do know that we have the council discretionary fund that is not exhausted for this fiscal. So that could be something, just throwing it out there, that we can look at supporting if there is a need. Staff spoke to our increased capacity with our new staff person that will be handling this file in conjunction with the director. And so I see a path forward potentially. So with that, I won't be voting in favor of the recommendation as it's read out here, and open to thoughts from staff on that.
Just a point of a bit of clarification. The community services coordinator is not involved in the bylaw. They're on the community services side around the relationship building, so they would not be involved in this process.
Thanks for that clarification. And and I think to Councillor Cole-Hamilton's comments, you know, you know, this is a pinch point. I mean, this is where the rubber's hitting the road. But you know, for myself personally, I do have a real confidence and high level of trust in terms of how we've done things and how we've continually improved. And I think one of the challenges that I see is that we could potentially tweak this to death, so to speak, because there's so many things that could continually be improved on. Whereas where it is right now seems to be in a good place. And again, go back to the point that between second and third reading, there's still those opportunities to tweak things. And so I you know, for that reason, I'll be supporting it. And I do hope that other people have the trust that we will make sure that this is has been, but will continue to be looking to those that can be harmed the most by this. So with that, I don't see any further questions or comments at this point. So I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? And we have one opposed. Councillor Jolicoeur. And thank you very much for that conversation and for your comments, Councillor Jolicoeur. It's much appreciated. We're now going to go back to our regularly scheduled program, which was item 7, I believe. And we'll maybe just wait for a few seconds if you guys.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm. I think we've got another hour. So plus, okay, yeah. Well, I'm just wondering if we should. Okay. Like starting off by. All right.
When yoga stretch.
Exactly. Councillor Hillian.
I move that council receive the solid waste automated curbside collection update briefing note.
Excellent. That's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions or comment, or did you want to speak to it? Oh, yeah. All right. We will I'll pass over to our city manager, Jeff Garber.
Thank you through the Mayor and Council. This is obviously a very important project. We've put a significant amount of resources, time, energy, and engagement in its development. Mr. Shaw had prepared, his staff had prepared some information. I just want to give a little update if that's okay with Council.
Great, thank you through the mayor to council. I'll note that I also share an excitement for solid waste. So if anybody else is looking for a dinner guest that wants to talk about solid waste, I'm more than happy to participate. The purpose of this briefing note, of course, is to provide council with an update of the rollout of the city's new solid waste automated curbside collection service and to highlight key milestones and associated impacts to the residents serviced by this new collection model. January 2nd, 2024 marked the official transition to automated curbside collection services for the city of Courtenay. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank council for their support, the participating staff that joined us through this rollout and the build out of this program, Imterra Services, who's our contracted service provider, and the residents in the city of Courtenay for making this rollout a great success. In the lead up to the start of this service, nearly 30,000 carts were delivered to almost 10,000 residents across the city. Additionally, the city, in partnership with the town of Comox, released a robust communication strategy spanning the better part of 2023. This work was undertaken in an effort to inform the public of the changes to the system, of which has inspired much conversation in the community and engagement with city staff directly. This briefing note will serve to summarize the automated curbside collection service and provide updates to council on the relevant and noteworthy items relative to the transition of this new service. And as a nod to the recently adopted communication strategy, staff have attached an FAQ to this document for the ease of information consumption. With that, Mr. Thompson and I would be happy to answer any questions that council may have.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And are there any questions or comments? Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I don't think I have any questions, but just wanted to thank staff for their hard work on this, of course. I think things have gone smoothly in the first little while from what I've experienced in my neighborhood. And I wanted just to highlight this app that I've been using for a while, Courtenay Collects, and it's actually been instrumental in helping me figure out what goes where. And I've actually searched items like paper napkins or raw meat, cooked bones and so on, and found that they can actually go in the composter. You can correct me if I've mentioned a wrong one, but anyways, instrumental on really condensing the amount of garbage I have so I can make that 2-week length of time before pickup. So good job, and looking forward to seeing it work out.
Thanks, Councillor Frisch. Councillor Moore.
I'll just be brief. Yeah, I thought the report was great. It really outlined how there can be changes after we get through the 4 seasons, I think was what was in the report. I wanted clarification, the wildlife receptacles are people in those wildlife areas get one, and then other people can get one and they do pay for it, because I thought that originally it was that they had to pay for it, but in the report, it looked like they don't.
That's correct. I'll let Manager of Solid Waste Services, Mr. Thompson, speak to that.
Yeah, sure. Through the mayor to council, the cost of, there is no cost to the wildlife resistant card.
Okay.
It's just based on availability. We have a limited number,
Okay.
so we really want to focus on those.
Because there's definitely, I think, a much broader area that's impacted by wildlife than what's indicated on that map. So I don't know how many extra requests you've had, but I mean, weekly I see people talking about wildlife getting in, and they're not in those zones. And I know that the area where I used to live, there's like 5-6 blocks that are pretty impacted. So you'll probably get some requests if you haven't already. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Councillor Morin. I don't see any other comments, but Councillor Jolicoeur.
Oh, no, next. Thanks, Mayor. Card exchanges on page 2 of the staff report. The exchange of cards, and you spoke to the lack of card selection survey in 2022. And even in the initial reports you were providing to us was quite clearly laid out that this is based on other municipalities of like sizes and the data that we do have available. What are we telling citizens when they're calling Public Works to find out about card exchange? I don't know if I've received or we've received some communications that their citizens are being told that maybe wait to see if you actually don't need it, seasonal changes, etc. And so I was hoping to see that in here, and I don't necessarily see what our policy is for the card exchange specifically. So I'm wondering, other than the